The river did not look dangerous at first glance. Sunlight sparkled across its surface, calm and inviting, the way a mirror sometimes hides a knife's edge. Ethan Cole had been riding along its banks for most of the morning, boots caked with red dust, hat pulled low against the glare. He knew rivers in the southwest could turn treacherous after a mountain storm, but nothing prepared him for the sight that unfolded ahead. A sudden splash, followed by frantic thrashing. His horse tossed its head uneasily, catching the scent of panic in the air. At first, Ethan thought it was an animal caught in the current, but as he drew closer, his heart thudded in his chest. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. The figure was massive, shoulders broad, and arms cutting the water in strong, deliberate strokes. Yet the current was merciless, dragging her toward a jagged cluster of rocks jutting up like broken spears. Ethan didn't stop to think. Instinct took over. He kicked free of his saddle, boots hitting the muddy bank, and hurled himself into the icy torrent. The shock of the cold hit like a hammer. Water surged around him, spinning him sideways, but his eyes locked on the drowning figure. Closer now. He could see she was a woman, taller than most men he'd ever met. Long black hair whipped across her face, tangling in the current, while her beaded buckskin clung to her frame like a second skin. She fought fiercely, not flailing like the drowning usually did, but measured, calculated, as if even death would have to wrestle her for every inch. Ethan's arm wrapped around her waist, just as her strength gave out. She didn't resist him, didn't claw in blind terror. Instead, she looked at him with eyes dark and sharp, as if judging his worth even while she gasped for breath. Together they fought the river, each stroke pulling them closer to the bank until, at last, they collapsed onto the gravel shore. For a long moment neither spoke, lungs heaving, bodies trembling from exhaustion. Then she rose to her full height, towering over Ethan, water dripping from her hair and clothing. She didn't look like someone who had nearly drowned. She looked like someone who had been tested and survived. Ethan staggered to his feet, brushing river mud from his hands. "You're safe now," he managed, though he doubted she understood his words. Her expression remained unreadable, a mask of quiet intensity. Finally, she placed a hand on her chest. "Nayeli," she said, her voice low but steady. Ethan tapped his chest in return. "Ethan Cole." For the briefest flicker of a moment, her eyes softened. Then she glanced downstream, where the current foamed white around the rocks that might have been her grave. Shaking her head firmly, she turned back toward the wild hills. That night, she stayed at his small camp. Silent, but not unfriendly. She accepted dried meat, helped gather wood, even kept watch as the fire burned low. Yet before dawn, she was gone, leaving only a trail of wet footprints and, beside his bedroll, a single eagle feather laid with deliberate care. Ethan turned the feather over in his fingers, puzzled. It didn't feel like a token of gratitude. It felt like a message, though he couldn't begin to guess what it meant. By evening, he had his answer. The distant thunder of hooves carried across the valley, growing louder until a dozen mounted warriors appeared at the ridge, sunlight flashing off painted lances. At their head rode an elder whose presence was undeniable, his gaze fixed directly on Ethan. When the riders drew up in formation, silence hung heavy. Then the elder dismounted and spoke in perfect English, his voice calm, yet commanding. "You pulled my daughter from the water," he said. Not a question, a statement, a fact he already knew. And then came the words that made Ethan's pulse quicken. "I have come," the elder said, "to discuss your reward." Ethan Cole stood frozen as the riders closed in, their formation sharp as a blade. The ground trembled beneath the pounding of hooves until the column fanned out in a half circle around his camp. His horse snorted nervously, stamping at the dirt. Ethan's hand twitched toward the empty rifle leaning by his bedroll, but one look at the warriors told him it wouldn't matter. 12 armed men, disciplined and ready. He wouldn't last a heartbeat if things turned ugly. The elder dismounted with the grace of someone half his age. His long braids were streaked with silver, his face weathered by decades of sun and storms, and his chest bore the beadwork of a man whose every stitch carried meaning. When his gaze met Ethan's, it was like being caught in a current stronger than the river itself. "You pulled my daughter from the water," the elder said again, his tone not grateful but deliberate, as if the words were the first step in something larger. Ethan swallowed. "She was drowning. I couldn't just—" The elder raised a hand, stopping him cold. "Her name is Nayeli. She told me about the man who risked his life." His English was perfect, spoken with the calm rhythm of someone who had used it often in diplomacy. "I am Chief Nastas." The name landed like a weight. Ethan had heard whispers of Nastas from traders and drifters, stories of a leader who united fractured bands, a man respected even by enemies. Facing him now, Ethan understood why. Nastas gestured, and one of his warriors stepped forward carrying a leather-wrapped bundle. The others remained still, but their eyes tracked Ethan's every movement. He felt like prey caught between predators, though none had yet bared their teeth. "There is a law among our people," Nastas continued, "older than memory. When a man saves the life of another, especially one chosen for leadership, a debt of balance is created. It cannot be ignored. It cannot be repaid with simple words." Ethan shifted uneasily. "I didn't ask for, yet you earned it," Nastas cut in, his voice sharpening for the first time. Then he softened, almost weary. "Do you think we would let such an act vanish like smoke? No. What you did binds you to us, whether you wished it or not." The warrior laid the leather bundle at Ethan's feet. Nastas knelt and unwrapped it with deliberate care, revealing an object that glimmered in the firelight. A medallion, heavy and ancient, engraved with symbols Ethan couldn't read, but instinctively knew mattered. It wasn't just ornament. It was legacy. "This belonged to my father, and his father before him," Nastas said. "It is not given lightly. It means you are offered a place among us, not as guest, but as family. Land, protection, a voice in council, and if you prove worthy, more." His eyes flicked briefly toward the horizon, where Nayeli had vanished that morning. Ethan caught the implication, but said nothing. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. He was a wanderer, a man without ties, drifting from job to job, camp to camp. Belonging had never been an option. Now, without warning, it was being placed in his hands like a burden made of gold. "What if I refuse?" Ethan asked quietly. Nastas studied him, expression unreadable. "Then the debt remains unpaid, and debts of this kind have consequences. For you, for us. The river does not give back without taking." Silence stretched, broken only by the crackle of Ethan's fire. The warriors watched, their lances gleaming. The medallion lay between them like a line in the sand. "You do not need to answer now," Nastas said at last. "The sun will set soon. By the time it rises again, you must decide. Choose belonging, or choose exile. There is no middle path." With that, the chief rose, rewrapped the medallion, and handed it back to his warrior. The riders withdrew a few paces, making camp within sight, but leaving Ethan space to think. It was not mercy. It was pressure. Ethan sat alone by the fire long after the chief turned away. He turned the eagle feather Nayeli had left in his fingers, the faint scent of river water still clinging to it. Belonging, exile, debt, reward. Words spun in his head like sparks rising into the night. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole realized the frontier had stopped letting him drift. The current had pulled him into something far larger, and whether he wanted it or not, he was already part of the story. The warriors' campfires burned like watchful eyes across the clearing, their glow just far enough away to remind him he was surrounded, yet close enough that he could hear the low murmur of voices in a language older than the land itself. His own fire sputtered, throwing weak shadows against the cottonwoods. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the river again, Nayeli's dark hair streaming like a banner in the current, the desperate weight of her body as he pulled her against the rapids, the eagle feather she had left behind. By dawn, the decision still gnawed at him. He walked to the riverbank, the same place where he had first heard her splashing in the water. The current looked calmer now, but Ethan knew better. Rivers didn't change overnight. Beneath the surface, danger still roared, unseen. He knelt, running a hand through the icy water, wondering if that was what Nastas had meant. That beneath any choice, freedom or belonging, exile or family, ran hidden currents strong enough to drag a man under. A soft rustle behind him pulled his thoughts away. Nayeli stepped from the trees, moving with a deliberate grace that silenced the morning birds. She was no longer in her soaked buckskin, but in fresh garments marked with beadwork Ethan didn't understand, but instinctively knew, told a story. Her limp was noticeable now, but her posture was unbowed. "My father says you are thinking," she said, her English halting but clear. "I am," Ethan admitted, standing. "Though I don't know if I'm the kind of man your people think I am." Nayeli studied him with those unyielding eyes. "When you pulled me from the river, did you ask if you were the right man?" The question stopped him. He remembered the cold, the roar of the current, the way instinct, not thought, had driven him forward. "No," he said. "I just acted." "That is why my father offers you the medallion," she replied simply. "A man who acts with courage before thinking of himself is rare. Among our people, such a man is never ignored." Ethan shook his head. "Courage? I've made more mistakes than I can count. Half the time I've barely scraped by. And belonging," his voice trailed off. "Belonging isn't something I've ever been good at." Nayeli stepped closer, close enough that he could see the faint scar along her jawline, the kind only earned through hardship. "You gave me life when the river tried to take it. Our law says I am now bound to help you live yours. If you choose the tribe, I will teach you. If you choose the trail, then I owe you no more. That is the truth." The words hit him harder than he expected. Bound, not just him to them, but her to him. Ethan looked across the clearing toward the warriors' camp. Their silhouettes moved with purpose, sharpening weapons, tending horses, preparing for something. "Your father spoke of strangers," he said quietly. "Men in your lands." Nayeli's eyes darkened. "They take horses, cut trees, burn what they do not need. They move like men with no respect. My people prepare to face them, with or without you." The weight of her words pressed on him like the river's current. With or without you. As the sun climbed higher, Ethan wandered back to his camp. The medallion had not been returned, but its presence lingered like an invisible anchor in the dirt between him and Chief Nastas. By midday, Nastas approached again, his expression unreadable. He said little, only that Ethan's time was running short. By sunrise, the decision must be spoken aloud. That evening, Ethan sat alone by his dying fire. The eagle feather rested in his palm, its edges glowing faintly in the firelight. He thought of the years behind him, lonely trails, jobs that never lasted, nights where nobody cared whether he lived to see morning. The medallion represented more than duty. It represented something he had never allowed himself to imagine, a place to belong. But belonging came with chains as well as gifts, and he knew once he accepted, there would be no turning back. As the night deepened, he looked toward the warriors' camp and realized the truth. His life of drifting was over, whether he chose yes or no. The river had carried him to this moment. Now he had to decide if he would swim with the current or be swept away by it. The sun was just breaking over the horizon when Ethan Cole walked back into the circle of warriors. Their camp had already stirred to life. Horses stamped nervously as men tightened saddles. Fires burned low, casting the last glow of night against weathered faces. The air carried the scent of sage, smoke, and something heavier, expectation. Dozens of eyes turned as Ethan stepped into view, but no one spoke. Only the Chief, Nastas, stood waiting beside the fire, the wrapped bundle in his hands. "You have thought," Nastas said, his English smooth, measured. Ethan nodded. His throat felt dry as dust. "I have." The silence that followed pressed on him like the weight of the river. This was no longer about a single life pulled from the water. It was about binding himself to something larger than he'd ever dared touch. He thought of Nayeli's words, the law of balance, the bond between rescuer and rescued. He thought of his own endless wandering, the trail miles that had added up to nothing but loneliness. He looked Nastas in the eye. "I accept." For a moment, the camp remained still, as if the land itself was holding its breath. Then Nastas gave a single nod. "So be it." The chief unwrapped the bundle with careful hands. The medallion gleamed in the morning light, its engravings catching the fire's last glow. Nastas stepped forward and lifted the cord, placing it around Ethan's neck. The metal was heavier than Ethan expected, warm from the chief's hands. "With this," Nastas said, his voice rising so all could hear, "you are bound to our people. Your struggles are ours. Your victories are ours. Your enemies are ours." The warriors answered with a low, resonant chant that rolled through the clearing like distant thunder. Ethan felt the sound more than heard it, vibrating through his chest, through the medallion, through the earth itself. When the chant ended, Nastas's tone shifted. "With belonging comes duty. Strangers have entered our lands. They take without respect. They burn what is sacred. Tomorrow, we will face them." Ethan's gut tightened. He had expected as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality sharper. This wasn't just about sharing food or land. It was about standing against men who destroyed for sport. Nayeli stepped forward then, her eyes meeting his. She wore new buckskin, her hair bound back, her knife at her side. Yet her gaze carried something softer than the steel of readiness. "My father says you will learn our ways. He has asked me to guide you." Ethan managed a faint smile. "I'll try not to make a fool of myself." She didn't smile back. Instead, she spoke with the gravity of someone binding herself to a vow. "You gave me life. Now I am bound to help you keep yours." That evening, Ethan sat apart from the fire, fingering the medallion. Its weight pressed against his chest, heavier than iron, yet steadying somehow. Around him, warriors sharpened blades and whispered plans for the coming day. He watched them move with quiet confidence, each man knowing his place, each man trusting the other. It was everything Ethan had never known on the drifting trail. Nayeli sat nearby, silent but present, her presence a reminder of why he stood among them at all. He realized he no longer felt like an outsider watching from the edges. He was part of this now. But belonging came at a price, and tomorrow he would begin to pay it. Dawn broke sharp and clear, the kind of morning where every sound seemed to carry twice as far. Ethan Cole adjusted the cinch on his saddle, the medallion cool against his chest, as if reminding him of the choice he had made. Around him, the Apache warriors prepared in practiced silence. Arrows slid into quivers, rifles were checked, and the horses shifted restlessly, sensing the tension in the air. Chief Nastas rode at the head, his presence anchoring the group like a mountain anchors the horizon. Nayeli sat her horse to his right, tall and unyielding despite the limp that still lingered from her injury. When her eyes met Ethan's across the camp, she gave a single nod, not encouragement, not reassurance, but acknowledgement. He was one of them now. By mid-morning, they reached the canyon rim. From the shadowed ridgeline, Ethan spotted them first, the strangers. 15, maybe 20 men, scattered among the trees like wolves circling a carcass. Their camp sprawled with careless arrogance, fires burning too hot, horses tethered roughly, empty bottles glinting in the dirt. Ethan's jaw tightened. He knew their type. Men who lived by taking, convinced the land owed them tribute. He'd ridden with men like that once, long ago, before he'd grown tired of leaving ruin in his wake. The sight of them now twisted something deep in his chest. "They take without asking," Nayeli said quietly, her voice carrying over the wind. "They cut trees we consider sacred, burn the forest for their fires. They're not just careless," Ethan murmured. "They're marking territory. Men like that, they don't stop on their own." Nastas turned his weathered face toward him. "What do they plan?" Ethan studied the camp. The strangers were armed, yes, but sloppy. Guards lounged instead of watching. Horses were saddled, but not checked. And their leader, broad-shouldered, with a red bandana knotted around his neck, barked orders like a man who ruled through fear, not respect. "They'll raid," Ethan said finally. "Soon. That's why they're here. They'll take cattle, horses, women if they can. They burn to make people run. Then they take what's left." Nastas's eyes narrowed, unreadable. "Then we stop them before they move." The decision was made as simple as breathing. Warriors fanned out, vanishing into the rocks and mesquite, like shadows dissolving in sunlight. Ethan found himself following Nayeli, his heart hammering louder than the horse's hooves. He wasn't Apache, not truly. But today, he would stand or fall as one. By the time the sun stood high overhead, the trap was set. From their concealed perch above the canyon floor, Ethan watched the strangers laugh and drink, unaware of the circle closing around them. He could see their weapons, repeaters, pistols, even a crate of stolen ammunition stacked near the fire. Enough firepower to start a war. Nayeli leaned close. "When my father signals, we ride." Her voice was calm, but Ethan caught the flicker of fire in her eyes, the kind of fire that came from defending home, family, and future. Ethan's fingers brushed the medallion at his chest. He realized the choice he'd made by the river had led him here, to this moment, where there was no turning back. The trail of his old life, the drifting, the running, ended here. Whatever came next, he would face it at the side of these people who had claimed him as their own. Across the canyon, Chief Nastas raised his hand. The attack began. The signal came with the sudden cry of a hawk cutting across the canyon sky. At once, the ridge erupted with motion. Apache warriors surged from the rocks like a flood breaking loose. arrows flying in precise arcs, rifles cracking with sharp thunder. The strangers below staggered in shock. Bottles dropped, cards scattered, and shouts filled the smoky camp. Some scrambled for weapons, others dove for cover, tripping over their own gear. Horses screamed against their tethers as chaos ripped through the canyon floor. Ethan Cole charged down the slope alongside Nayeli. Dust and stones exploded beneath pounding hooves. His rifle was steady in his hands, though his heart hammered like a war drum. This was no drifting fight for scraps. This was battle with purpose. The leader with the red bandana barked orders, dragging men into line. He was quick. Ethan gave him that, but not quick enough. Two warriors cut off his flank, arrows sinking deep into the earth around him, driving him back toward the fire. Gunfire roared. A bullet hissed past Ethan's ear, close enough to sting. He leaned low in the saddle, squeezed his trigger, and watched a stranger's rifle spin from his grasp. Smoke stung his eyes, the acrid scent of burned powder mixed with the resin of pine. Beside him, Nayeli loosed an arrow. It struck true, pinning another man's arm to the crate of stolen ammunition. The outlaw screamed, dropping to his knees. Without hesitation, she notched another shaft. Her movements were fluid, fierce, like the river itself that Ethan had pulled her from. The strangers tried to rally, forming a rough line at the edge of their camp, but they were clumsy compared to the precision of the warriors. Every time they shifted, the Apache pressed tighter, their formation weaving like a net. Still, Ethan knew desperation made men dangerous. One outlaw swung his rifle toward a cluster of women who had joined the fight with stones and spears. Ethan kicked his horse forward, the medallion slamming against his chest. He raised his rifle, fired once, and the man dropped, his weapon clattering harmlessly into the dirt. The battle tipped then. One by one, the strangers faltered, wounded, disarmed, or driven to their knees. The red bandana leader fought hardest, snarling like a cornered wolf, his revolver blazing until the cylinder clicked empty. He stood panting, chest heaving, when Nastas himself rode forward. The chief's voice boomed across the canyon. "Enough!" The word froze the air. The outlaws, beaten and surrounded, let their weapons fall. The dust settled. The canyon echoed only with the labored breaths of men who had stared at death and barely pulled back. Ethan lowered his rifle, his muscles trembling from adrenaline. Around him, the warriors stood tall, feathers bright in the sun, the chant of victory already rising in their throats. For the first time, Ethan didn't feel like an outsider in their circle. He felt like he had earned his place among them, shoulder to shoulder in the dust and smoke. Nayeli met his gaze. Her expression held no triumph, only solemn recognition. "This was only the beginning," she said softly. "Men like these, they always come back." Ethan touched the medallion at his chest. The metal was warm, almost alive. "Then we'll be ready," he answered, though he knew the fight ahead would demand more than bullets and bravery. It would demand everything he had left to give. The canyon still smelled of gunpowder when the last outlaw was bound. Warriors dragged the wounded into a circle, their weapons taken, their eyes wild with hate. Chief Nastas dismounted slowly, his presence commanding silence without a word. The victory was clear, but Ethan felt the weight in the air shift from battle to judgment. The chief's gaze swept over the captured men, then turned toward Ethan. "You fought with us. You stood when others would have run." His voice carried across the canyon like rolling thunder. "But battle proves courage, not loyalty. Loyalty must be tested in ways harder than bullets." Ethan stiffened in his saddle. He had known from the moment he accepted the medallion that this day would come. But hearing it aloud, under the scrutiny of warriors who had fought and bled beside him, tightened his throat. Nayeli rode forward, her face unreadable. "Our ways demand balance," she explained, her dark eyes holding Ethan's. "You have been given much already, our trust, our protection. To remain one of us, you must show what you are willing to give in return." Ethan swallowed hard. What kind of test? The answer came not from Nayeli, but from the gray-haired warrior called Grey Wolf, who stepped into the circle of prisoners. "One of these men must be judged tonight. He has confessed to burning our forest, to stealing horses from our people." Grey Wolf's voice was sharp, each word a stone dropped in water. "The judgment must be carried out by you, Ethan Cole, the man who claims to be our brother." The outlaw shoved forward, sunburned, bleeding, but still defiant. His lip curled when he saw Ethan. "So that's it? They want you to do their dirty work. You're no Apache. You're like me. Don't fool yourself." The words cut sharper than any blade. Ethan's hands tightened around his rifle. He didn't want this. Killing in battle was one thing. Chaos, heat, survival. But this was execution. Cold and deliberate. Nastas's voice was steady. "This is not about blood. It is about choice. If you would carry our medallion, then you must choose where you stand, with us or with men who poison the land." The circle grew still. Warriors watched. Women watched. Even the children, clinging to their mothers' skirts, watched. Ethan felt the weight of their eyes pressing him into the earth. He thought of his old life, nights spent drifting under stars, with no one waiting at dawn, the emptiness he had carried like a second skin. He thought of Nayeli's hand steady on her bowstring, her people chanting victory around the fire. He thought of belonging. Ethan lowered his rifle, stepping into the circle. The outlaw spat at the dust. "Do it then. Show them what you are." Ethan's voice was low, steady. "No, I won't kill a bound man." A murmur rippled through the warriors. Some frowned, others exchanged glances. But Chief Nastas lifted a hand for silence. His eyes burned into Ethan's. "Explain." Ethan raised his chin. "If I kill him tied, I'm no better than he is. If he faces me free, man to man, I'll stand against him. But this," he shook his head, "this isn't justice, it's revenge." For a long moment, no one moved. Then Nastas stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "You speak truth to power," he said at last. "That is the harder path, and it is the path of loyalty." The outlaw was dragged away to face trial by the council instead of the rope. A chant rose among the warriors, low at first, then building like thunder. Nayeli's eyes softened when they met Ethan's. There was no smile, no overt approval, only something deeper, an acknowledgement that he had chosen the tribe's way, not just survival. Ethan exhaled, feeling the weight of the medallion heavier against his chest than ever before. He had passed the trial, but the cost was clear. From now on, his choices would bind him not just to his own fate, but to an entire people. The canyon had grown quiet by dawn, its jagged walls glowing red beneath the first light. Smoke from last night's fires drifted lazily into the sky, carrying with it the memory of battle, of judgment, of choices that could not be undone. Ethan stood apart from the others at the edge of the river, the medallion warm against his chest, as if it carried its own heartbeat. Behind him, the Apache camp stirred to life. Women prepared food, children chased one another between the horses, and warriors sharpened blades dulled by combat. But something was different now. When the people looked at Ethan, their gazes no longer held suspicion, or testing silence. They held recognition. Chief Nastas approached, his steps measured, his presence as steady as the rising sun. "You refused vengeance," the elder said, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. "You chose justice instead. That choice marks you more than any battle won." He placed a weathered hand on Ethan's shoulder. "From this day, you walk as brother to my people. Your loyalty has been proven, and your voice will carry weight among us." The words settled into Ethan like a promise he had never thought he'd receive. For years, he had lived on the edges of society, drifting, rootless, a shadow passing through towns that forgot him as soon as he left. But here, among people who had every reason to distrust him, he had found belonging. Nayeli approached, her tall frame outlined by the rising light. She carried an eagle feather, its tip dipped in red ochre. "My grandfather asks that you accept this," she said softly, her eyes steady on his. "It is more than a symbol. It is a reminder that every choice you make now binds not just you, but all of us." Ethan accepted the feather, tucking it into the leather band of his saddle. "Then I'll do my best to honor it." Her lips curved, just barely, but enough to send warmth through him. "I believe you will." The tribe gathered near the council fire as Nastas addressed them. "The strangers who came to our lands will not be the last. Others will come, with greed in their hearts and fire in their hands. But we are not alone. We have a new brother who has seen the worth of our ways. And with his knowledge, his courage, and the bond of this medallion, we will face what comes together." A murmur of approval spread through the people. Warriors struck their spears against the earth in rhythm, a sound that echoed like a heartbeat through the canyon. Later, as the camp prepared to move toward their main village, Ethan found himself walking beside Nayeli. She studied him for a long moment before speaking. "When you pulled me from the river, you did not just save my life. You set in motion everything that followed. Do you regret it now?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "I used to think freedom meant having no ties to anyone, but I was wrong. Belonging, responsibility, those are the things that give freedom its worth." He glanced at her, the sunlight glinting in her dark eyes. "So no, I don't regret a thing." For the first time since he had met her, Nayeli's guarded expression softened into a true smile. "Then perhaps the river brought you to us for a reason." Ethan looked out across the horizon, where the land stretched wide and untamed. The frontier was still dangerous, still uncertain, but he no longer faced it alone. With the tribe at his back, and the weight of the medallion and feather reminding him of his bond, he felt ready for whatever storm might come. As the warriors mounted and the column began to move, Ethan swung into the saddle of his horse, returned to him, now decorated with Apache beadwork that spoke of honor. Nayeli rode at his side, her posture proud, her presence steady. Together, they rode north toward the mountains, where new challenges waited and a new life beckoned. The wind caught the white feathers tied to his bridle, making them dance against the morning light. They whispered of sacrifice, of loyalty, of a man who had been tested and found worthy. And as the tribe moved as one across the open plains, Ethan Cole finally understood. He had not just been given a reward for saving a life. He had been given a destiny.